This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Authority Supreme Herbicide from FMC. Stop weeds before they start with Authority Supreme Herbicide. This dual-action pre-emergent solution delivers extended control of tough grassy and broadleaf weeds in field peas, chickpeas, and soybeans. Apply pre-seed or up to 3 days after seeding. See your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, as always, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. You know, you look at our podcast downloads the past 3-4 weeks, it is like, boom, awesome. So many people downloading the RealAg Radio podcast, so please continue to do so. We really do appreciate it very much. Okay, today on the program, wow, what a day yesterday. We are going to break down with the reaction to the decision to give Canada and Mexico a 30-day reprieve on these 25% tariffs that President Trump was talking about and threatening to happen on today, February 4th. They've worked out a deal. Now, is this good? Is this bad? I've got some thoughts on it. We're also going to hear from somebody that spent his life in diplomatic circles and focused on trade. It's Michael Harvey. He's executive director with the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, better known as CAFTA. He's going to be here with us today to talk about how do all of the exportable commodity organizations, how do they feel? What are their concerns? What's going to happen in the next 30 days? What are the things that they're doing? Who's this a win for? Michael will have answers to all of that. We also got a product spotlight with ADAMA today. Looking forward to discussing that with a new product with them that is kind of one of its kind in the Canadian market. So stay tuned for that discussion. And we're also going to hear today from Bill Wirtz. He spoke at Crossroads last week in Edmonton. He's with the Consumer Choice Center talking about lessons learned from European ag policy. Ooh, sounds scary. What do we need to know? Amber Bell from Real Agriculture was at Crossroads and talked to Bill, so we'll have that conversation. And I think we're going to have some time at the back end of the show today for probably some top ag news stories of the day. We'll have to see how much time we have left at the back end. If you have any feedback on today's show, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also, of course, find Real Agriculture across all different social media platforms. You can also call that Real Ag feedback line. Now, the number is 855-776-6147. Now, I want to get my thoughts out here on what happened yesterday, and I think it's Canada should take the win, and I think that here's what I tweeted or put on X yesterday, and it got a ton of reactions, positive and bad. But we got to also see a bit of the forest through the trees here. Okay, so here's what I put out. I'm not sure why Canadians cannot take the victory, although temporary, why they cannot take the victory today. Seeing my X feed full of people angry that Trump can claim victory too, who cares? What else were you expecting? We had our feelings hurt as a nation. Let's get over it and focus on the bigger picture. And I still feel that way today. Now, can we claim that we won the war here? No, we won a battle. And it's okay. It is okay that it's being looked upon domestically in the U.S. as a victory as well. Mission accomplished. It's a big issue in the United States, border security. Southern border, northern border. We can argue about some of the numbers. And I've presented the difference between the fentanyl crossings in Canada and the northern border versus the southern border. They're not in the same stratosphere. We know, we get that. The fact is, from the White House's perspective, they can say Canada is doing something. The other thing that people are preoccupied by, to be honest with you, is that, and if you listen to this show regularly, we talked about this on Friday. we had it right. The timing was off because Trump moved the tariffs from the 1st to the 4th. At the end of the day, they agreed to, for the most part, they agreed to things that they had said Canada was going to do back in December. The $1.3 billion of increased money going into border security. Heck, the helicopters have been flying. It's already happening. It's already in motion. We're also going to put some people are saying border czar, and some people, CBC last night said it was a fentanyl czar that they're going to put in place. Okay, whatever. For some people, it doesn't matter. I'm not sure what outcome you were chasing here. I'm not sure what would actually classify as a win for you. Now, the ultimate win would be no tariffs going forward. Now, I'm not sure that's a reality. I really don't. At some point, we're going to have to renegotiate this USMCA because that's something the White House wants to do. And it's written into the agreement for that to be triggered July 1st or 4th, I'm not sure, of 2026. But they're going to want to do it early. We're going to ask Michael Harvey about that when he's on RealAg Radio today. Here's some of the responses from people in regards to this tweet. Evan Shout from Maverick Ag, who you hear on this program, says, we get money spent on securing our borders, fighting the drug trade, and finally a logical response from government. If anything, take a win for Canada and say thank you. Trump got more done in a week of threats than the last 9 years of Canadian elections. Casey Kimbrell, who is, he farms in, I can't remember what state Casey's in. He might be in the Dakotas. Casey says, hey, I'm thinking Canadians aren't as nice and friendly as they purported to be. I like that. Jim Hare says, I'm good with it. He was having a tantrum, so we gave him a lollipop. We'll see what happens next month. Phil Shaw says, I'm expecting no recourse, was ready for it. Robert Wager says, no one wins a trade war. To quote that immortal movie War Games, the only way to win is to not play. Ken Chow says, agreed. Let's show them in the next 30 days what we can do as a nation. Long overdue. Rock Gellick says, I'm not sure it's a realistic victory without treating the actual addictions. Drug users aren't just going to quit getting high because the price of the drug of choice went up. Without proper treatment, they will just find alternatives. This is for both sides of the border. Dennis Prouse, experienced government relations person, said the bigger picture, of course, being the urgent need to make our country more economically competitive starting yesterday. Former Ag Minister Jerry Wirtz sent a note and said, all that border and drug work is 9 years late. Glad it's being done. Mark Recker, farmer I know from Iowa, said, Shaun, no matter how this is spun, it's really a shitty way to treat an ally. So those are some of the responses from the audience on that tweet, and you can keep them coming. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. I would argue a little bit here, a little bit of a potential miss from the U.S. side in terms of, and we talked about this on the show here, which I really appreciate the perspectives of the panel members that we have and the guests that we have. And you, the audience. The Liberal government, you think back to that release that they put out on the $1.3 billion going back to last December, before the end of the year. They were moving in this direction. The Conservatives have been pushing the Liberals to move in this direction. Okay? And so the reality is that this has been a really easy yes. On this ask by the White House, this is a very easy ask. This is something that I don't think a lot of Canadians are going to push back on. What they're pushing back on is the perception that, hey, President Trump bullied us into doing it. Who cares? The fact is they're doing it, and they've been talking about it, and there's going to be some execution on it. I think it's important. We're trying to keep fentanyl out of this country of Canada just as much as the Americans are. Like, if fentanyl was something we weren't concerned about and it was them that was concerned, well, that's a whole different narrative. But I don't know. Like, I look in my community of Lethbridge, Alberta, people are bloody concerned about fentanyl. And so these measures, and again, similar to how Canada and the U.S. have worked together on something like ASF and keeping ASF out of the North American market, because the entry of ASF into the U.S. or into Canada is devastating for the entire continent. That's how we need to look at something like fentanyl. Be thinking about it the same way, where one less piece of fentanyl that gets into North America is better for both of us. And that's what I took out of yesterday. So we'll see where we go in the next 30 days, though, because I don't think the knife has been removed. And so the question is, what are the KPIs of the border security? Have they been communicated? And even if that all is the case, and it's a success story, what is next? Where do we go in the at least 30 days? Then do we start to work on some of the trade things? Does it become about Canadian, the banking regulation? Does it become about digital taxes? Is it going to be about dairy? Is it going to be about whatever we come up with? What is going to be the next ask? Because clearly there's an intention here to keep the pressure on, to execute on what the promises are, but at the same time, it's what's the next thing. And I think back to the Milk Business Conference, and I've been telling audiences in my speeches, don't be distracted by dairy, because there's way more issues here than dairy. But let's just use a dairy example. One of the things I heard at the Milk Business Conference in Vegas in early December, okay, is from Americans, and multiple people telling me this, that the ask is not going to be more dairy access. The ask is likely to be, Canada, meet your commitments of the TRQ allocation according to the U.S. definition. And so Canada has won the dispute panel, the last dispute panel. Canada, it feels it's very justified in its approach to this. But the ask going forward by President Trump may be, meet our definition. So that's something to watch out for from an agriculture perspective, and I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot more. But I say, Canada, take the win. U.S. has taken the win. Mexico's probably taken the win. It's okay. 30 days will live. And now it's what you do in the next 30 days that's really, really critical. And we're going to ask Michael Harvey from CAFTA what their organization's doing in the next 30 days to use this time very wisely indeed. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Michael Harvey from CAFTA right after this. We're in St. John's, Newfoundland at the Newfoundland Federation of Agriculture meeting, Ag Industry Symposium 2025. We've got Shelley Woodworth with Cavendish Agri-Services, Dr. David Burton at Dalhousie. Shelley, we'll start with you. What's one piece of advice for improving nitrogen management?
Split applying. I think the days of putting all your nitrogen on up front, those days are gone with the new products that we have, with the weather events that we have. And I also think we need to advocate for ourselves a little bit better. Everyone here is doing a really good job, but the consumers and the people buying our food don't always know our story and how good you guys really are doing. So we need to find a better way to advocate a little bit better for ourselves.
David?
Only use what you need and use it in a way that it's most effective. So more is no longer better necessarily. Some cases it is, but some cases it isn't. Use what you need and use the kind of new tools like split application, enhanced efficiency products that will ensure that nitrogen is used most efficiently and gets the job done.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Looking forward to all of Lindsay Smith's commentary and interviews that she's going to bring back from CattleCon in San Antonio, Texas. We'll have some of that on tomorrow's show. We'll see if she picks up a new pair of boots, maybe a hat. I know she was hoping that Ann Wasco would maybe take her around town and do some shopping, is what last thing I heard, at least on the group text. Let's talk about how for every acre, every row, every seed, precision wins every time. Only Seedmaster delivers unmatched accuracy for better yields and better profits. Seedmaster, driven by precision, leading the way in seeding innovation. You can find out more by going to seedmaster.ca. Big news on Monday, yesterday, was the fact that Canada has been given 30 days, essentially, at least 30 days, it's been described as relief from any sort of application of these 25% tariffs on Canadian goods going into the United States. There was 2 calls by Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump yesterday, and the news came late in the day. Good news for Canada, but is it a win? Our next guest will shed some light on it from an agriculture perspective. We're joined by the Executive Director at the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, better known as CAFTA. It is Michael Harvey. Michael, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me back, Shaun.
Okay, so is it a win? Is this a win for Canada?
It's a reprieve. It's a lot better than how things were during the weekend, Shaun.
Okay, so I know from my talking to people and reading some of the U.S. news, the U.S. is definitely viewing it as a win, especially on the southern border. A lot of Canadians are pointing out, hey, these are things that we said we were going to do a month ago. I have a federal government press release back in December. I'm saying this $1.3 billion. Does any of that matter in this?
That's hard to say, Shaun. Really, it's very difficult to understand precisely the motives of the U.S. administration right now, and I think the role of a group like CAFTA is to try to bring back the discussion to rational trade policy. And rational trade policy is that for United States producers and consumers, as for Canadian producers and consumers, it is a bad idea to build up tariff barriers. The good thing is to tear down tariff barriers.
We've heard a lot of talk from President Trump and those around him on the trade file, a lot of talk about this structural change, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. A lot of times that was in reference to China. But one of the examples that is often given is, like, for example, Canadian auto manufacturing. There's also a real threat here on taking some of the agri-processing, meat packers and the meat production, or, canola processing, or, a crush facility, taking that back to North Dakota instead of having it in Manitoba. How worried are you about the potential structural change the U.S. is trying to execute here?
Well, the first thing I say is, yes, I'm worried. But then very quickly, I think when you're working through these things as a professional, you have to take that back to what can we do to face a situation that worries us? And what can we do right now is to work as closely as possible with U.S. counterparts, with U.S. producers, to help them understand how bad a decision like this would be for them, how the North American trading environment is good for them, is good for the United States, is good for United States producers, is good for United States consumers, and through the American political process, get back to a position of more realistic trade policy.
As you look across your membership, there's a lot of different commodities. Canada very reliant on trade with the United States, but also with sending goods and products around the world. Very trade reliant. Are there certain pieces of the membership that maybe is more exposed to this trade war this trade war battle and this tariff talk than some of the others?
Well, I'd say everyone is, because the United States is our biggest market, but also what is really interesting about the North American trading environment is that we produce things together, that we have these integrated supply chains, as you mentioned. So where things would be tremendously problematic would be to start unraveling some of those supply chains. So if you look at meat, where the live animal spends part of its life on one side of the border, part of its life on the other side of the border. If you look at feeds that go across the border, if you look at processed food, which is, again, made on both sides of the border, we really have a deeply integrated economy, and becoming less integrated would make the United States and Canada poorer.
Yeah. Because why? What ultimately happens in that scenario?
It would make everything less efficient. I think Canada's great strategic decision when we signed the free trade agreement with the United States, was that 30 years ago now? And then NAFTA after that, was that we moved towards a system where you do the economically rational thing. You get the lower cost input, you sell where you can get the best price. And the market means that the most efficient things take place. And if the most efficient things take place, then the producer will get more and the consumer will pay less, right? Moving away from that increases the cost for everybody.
Yeah. Michael, what in the next 30 days, what is an example of something that your organization, your membership is doing to use this 30, even though what was negotiated here was mainly about the border, drugs and immigration, we know that some of the other issues are not going away. So what are you doing in this next 30 days?
So we have members who are speaking to American counterparts, again, to try to get these messages across in the United States. It's interesting. The United States political environment has been one over the last couple of weeks where business people are very concerned about speaking up in public in a way that is perceived as opposing President Trump. That makes sense. The election just took place. The president is new. He's in his period of strongest strength. He has a negotiating style which is such that if you speak up against him, there can be consequences to that. But I've noticed in the last few days people peeking their head up over the ledge and saying some things. The American Farm Bureau spoke up saying that there are negative effects to tariffs. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce spoke up saying there's negative effects to tariffs. The market spoke up yesterday. It wasn't great for the TSX, but it was a bad day for NASDAQ and the Dow Jones as well. And everybody says, I don't like prescribing motives to people, but everyone says that President Trump sees the stock market as one of his key performance indicators. And everything would indicate that the market doesn't like it when people are talking about tariffs. And I think we're seeing it again today with the Chinese response to the tariffs on them.
What you just said, I don't disagree with any of it. Where it leads me to, though, doesn't that showcase in the meantime the weakness of our traditional Team Canada approach? In the renegotiation of NAFTA to create the CUSMA and USMCA agreement, Canada worked hard at the state level, also in DC, talking to members of Congress, trying to push the narrative that free trade was good for not only Canada but also for the U.S. Are some of our U.S. friends on free trade going to be as willing to speak up, at least in public, for the benefits of free trade at this moment, or are we relying totally on backroom discussions from some of those people?
So, Shaun, I've been doing this kind of work, lobbying, government relations, negotiations in complex environments for around 30 years now. And you always have to regularly look at the strategic environment, try to figure out what the interests are of the people you're dealing with, try to figure out exactly where the decision-making process is, and you need to revisit that every now and again to adjust. It's obvious that right now we're adjusting. We're maybe adjusting on the fly, and that's fine. So let's adjust on the fly and figure out who has influence on President Trump, figure out what is affecting President Trump's decision-making process today, and then concentrate on that. But there's lots of different things, right? There's people, there are interest groups. I mentioned the market, that's rational economic decision-making. There's different things that influence the president, and yes, we have to concentrate on those things. It's obvious that we have to get into MAGA land, as everybody says, or Trump land, however you want to call it, and get to those people. We also have to understand that things will change a bit over time. I mean, the U.S. political process is constant election mode, right? They're going to have midterms in 2 years. People are fundraising all the time. You constantly have to see what the president is reacting to. And let's be clear, it's good not to be too emotional about it, because President Trump has a communication style which can sort of lead you down a lot of rabbit holes that aren't really worth it. Let's be calm, manage things rationally, and respond rationally.
When I appeared on Ag Day yesterday in the U.S. on Monday morning, I was asked by Tyne Morgan what was the best case scenario for Canada, and what leading into this decision D-Day, these a couple conversations between the president and the prime minister. And I had said maybe Canada agreeing to an early renegotiation of USMCA so that it could maybe be wrapped up before the midterms would maybe that's the best case. It seemed like yesterday was a better case, at least in the short term. How willing do you think Canada is going to be to agree to an early renegotiation potentially that President Trump seems to be pushing for?
I don't think early negotiation is a very problematic thing. Negotiation means talking, and we're always willing to talk. Really, the question is the terms of the negotiation. If moving negotiation forward means that we come to an agreement and then attention shifts to other things, I think that's fine. Dates aren't really the issue. The issue is what we come to as an agreement. If President Trump wants to renegotiate the agreement, treaties are always open to renegotiation is the reality. Yeah.
And keeping open dialogue, in some ways, it kind of, you could also look at kind of buys Canada time. Is that how you would look at that process?
Talking is not a very costly thing. I think it's important to be talking all the time, whether the talking is within a structured renegotiation process or just constant discussion. That's great. I found it very interesting. The Mexican president, her response was a little bit different than Prime Minister Trudeau's. She didn't put tariffs on right away in retaliation. She went to suggesting working groups. I think working groups are a good approach. In any case, we're going to have to talk this through. The structure of how we talk things through is secondary.
Did CAFTA have a position? Because, it's interesting. On Sunday, listening to a lot of pundits, very critical. There were some people inside Canada critical of Canada's aggressive approach, that we had kind of missed the point of all of this. Mexico was taking a different position, as you just laid out. At the end of the day, we both ended up in the same place, at least on the surface. Did CAFTA have a position on Canada's response to the threats by President Trump?
So CAFTA's position has been that we're going to keep beating the drum for fair and open trade. We believe in a world with fewer trade barriers. We believe in a world with more open trade. And we're not going to get into the constant details of how to manage things on a daily basis. I think it's a bit of a trap for us in an environment that, let's face it, more and more is going through Twitter, is going through people reacting to other people's tweets and then them reacting to their tweets. That's not the world for CAFTA. That's a world for political actors. I find that world exhausting, to be honest. And I don't think it's very strategic for an organization like CAFTA. We've been broadly supportive of the government's approach, but we're not going to micromanage the approach and respond to every element of it.
Great stuff. Hey, Michael, really appreciate your insight and your perspective here, and I'm sure we have lots to talk about going forward here in the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much.
Looking forward, Shaun, anytime.
That is Michael Harvey. He's Executive Director at the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, better known as CAFTA. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 right after this.
If you're applying a low-rate N stabilizer, you might be falling for a losing strategy. Low-rate products promise great results, but may lack the potency of higher active ingredient concentrations, so great isn't always what you get. Don't put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated, but did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agri-Mart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's time for a product spotlight with ADAMA, and we're joined right now by Ambrely Ralph. She is product manager for herbicides with ADAMA Canada. Ambrely, great to have you on the show.
Hey, Shaun, thanks for having me.
Okay, so ADAMA's got a lot going on. ADAMA Canada recently announced the launch of a unique wild oat herbicide for wheat, Cazado. And I love that name. And Dr. Charles Geddes with AFC at Lethbridge, he stressed that addressing wild oat herbicide resistance is obviously a growing problem that requires urgent innovation to preserve crop productivity. How does Cazado address this need that Dr. Geddes is talking about?
Awesome. Well, it's a truly unique product, and it's the first and only multiple mode of action graminicide for use on wheat that's going to control oats and herbicide-resistant wild oats. It's an in-crop tool that can be used as part of an integrated pest management system that you can use to proactively, prevent the onset of future resistance in the field, but also controlling the wild oats at the time of application. And it's really unique technology because we developed it under the premise of truly efficacious herbicide mixtures. So those are really important when it comes to weed management and control. And really that comes down to, both actives work on the same weed. So this is a true multi-mode action graminicide, pinoxidin and thiacarbazone formulated together. So both of these actives work on the target weeds, so the wild oat. Both of these actives have truly different target sites. So one's a group 1, pinoxidin, the other one's a group 2, which is thiacarbazone. They also both degrade differently within the plant, so the plant wild oat metabolizes them differently, and they are, crop safe because of the way the formulation is built. And then they're both full doses of both pinoxidin and thiacarbazone. So truly unique to the market, a truly unique formulation, and it's a canola oil-based formulation too.
Hammering those wild oats. They don't know what's coming. They're going to be so caught off guard. Can you tell us about how long Cazado has been in the works and touch on some of the protocols that you've gone through from a field testing standpoint?
Okay, great. Well, Cazado is unique for Canada, and it's been a concept that we've been working on for over 7 years with our global team. We have a formulation and R&D location based out of Israel, and that team's been really important in helping us develop the concept, do some product concept development, and then getting to the level of the formulation that we're actively commercializing. The formulation that we're working with now that's known as Cazado has been tested rigorously in Canada as well within our development program. For over 3 years now, we've been testing it in small scale research with several different third-party contractors across Canada. And then this past year, in 2024, we conducted 44 farmer-applied field scale trials. And why that's really important to us is, as you develop from lab scale into small plots and then into full field use, you learn something new along each way, and different problems or different aspects can be kind of keyed in on, right? And the idea behind the field scale trials was really getting it into the hands of farmers that are going to want to use it commercially when it's available, testing it in their equipment, testing it in their fields, in their geographies, with their conditions, and then really tank mixing it and testing it the way that they would use it into their integrated pest management system already and comparing it to what they're currently using. So it was a really neat protocol that we were able to run through last year, and we're really excited about the results as well.
Very cool. And available for 2025. So where can farmers get a hold of Cazado?
Right. So it is unique to Canada for this product, and it will be available for the 2025 upcoming commercial season. Really, we work with our full service retail channel partner program. So I recommend all growers just reach out to their retails and ask them for, the details on it and how to best incorporate it into their own farming practices.
Yeah, great stuff. And also, you can probably go to the ADAMA website as well.
You nailed it. Yeah. ADAMA.com is a great place to get information. You'll see lots of things there on results and tech sheets and other support tools. And then we actually have an upcoming webinar on February 21st, that growers and retailers and customers can sign up for to get a little bit more detailed training on it as well.
Hey,
and that information is on our website as well.
Perfect. And remember, the key point there, as Ambrely brought up, make sure you talk to your local retail and push them and ask questions, and your local ADAMA rep at the same time. Ambrely, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, that's Product Spotlight with ADAMA Canada. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, right after this.
Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. And we're giving back. In the past 5 years, Co-op has invested over $1.1 billion in the prairies through building, upgrading, and expanding local facilities. And we've returned over $1.17 billion to Co-op members in the prairies. Co-op, we're all building something for the future. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm. Calling all Montana, Dakotas, and northern Minnesota growers, are you looking for a profitable addition to your farm that can deliver value beyond yield? The new Seed Omega-3 canola production system can help you unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities and an active God clause. Contracts include first-in-class agronomy support and free on-farm pickup after harvest. Contracts are available now. Commit early to maximize your opportunity. To learn more, visit omega3canola.com.
And we're back here on RealAg Radio. This segment's brought to you by Alpine Liquid Fertilizers, your full-season crop fertility specialists from start to finish. Make sure for this spring, when you're thinking about liquid fertilizers, you think about nature's Alpine. Okay, now that we've talked a little bit about trade, we're going to talk a little bit about ag policy. Now, from the perspective of what's been going on in Europe, it's a bit of a warning sign, potentially what we don't want to have. That's my personal opinion. Maybe you disagree, and you can provide that perspective and send me an email. But we need to be a little bit concerned. We don't want that to come to North America, because there has been some consequences that European farmers and society have seen some of the realities of. Recently, at the Crossroads Conference that happened in Alberta, RealAgriculture's Amber Bell caught up with Bill Wirtz. Now, Bill is with the Consumer Choice Center, and Bill provided some perspective on lessons learned from European ag policy. Here's that conversation.
So talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Europe, what some of that ag policy is looking like, and what's gone right and wrong.
Yeah, a lot of things have gone wrong, really. So we started with this farm-to-fork strategy about 5 years ago. Very ambitious policies, reducing pesticides, slashing fertilizer use, reducing land use overall, increasing organic production. And the problem was that farmers were not properly consulted, and it was the policy targets were essentially completely off. So what we dealt with is increasing prices for consumers and a situation where farmers didn't feel like they had a future for their business model. Mm-hmm. That led to major protests that I'm sure many of your viewers have seen on TV, that had a fundamental effect in the sense that people voted in accordance to what farmers thought was an important policy issue, and has overturned a lot of those regulations that were being discussed. So we're really now at the point where all the political parties pretend that they're now farmers' parties and they support the farmers and they're going to do everything to make it right. I'm skeptical, still, but we're going in a better direction in the sense that we have realized our mistakes. And I want to get that message across to audiences in Canada and everywhere else.
Right, and how many of these political parties do you think are actually now talking to farmers? Do you think that there was a real shift in that?
I think in politics, the first shift is always narrative before any practical things. So the press release will say, we're the Farmers' Party, before anyone has actually talked to a farmer. So I think that's a big issue, and I think it's always important for people to be careful about how narratives, pan out in politics. But I also do think that there is, some of the new staff in the European Commission, the new Agriculture Commissioner, for instance, he has a background in farming through the family. He relates to this issue much better. He's going to be a bit of a compromise kind of guy who tries to smooth things over that have gone wrong over the last few years. So essentially, you could say that we were the most ambitious people that were around in 2019 and 2020 when it comes to environmental policy and agriculture. And now we're kind of taking it easy and realizing that it takes actually more time and thought to make rules that affect a very complicated system that is farming.
Right, and how are consumers generally feeling about it? I mean, it's really hard for a lot of urban consumers. They're out, removed from the farm.
Yeah.
How are they feeling about how the changes have been implemented and the protests?
So the protests, the polling that we can see is like usually between 80 and 95% support for the farmer protests. And those specifically hit the big cities because that's where the European capitals are, where the parliament sits and so on. So a lot of sympathy for what the farmers are asking for, were asking for, not having those tax increases in Germany, not having the slashed margins in France for the relationship between retailers and producers. So a lot of those things were achieved because there was public support for them. I think overall consumers are still confused over what the real price of food is because we also subsidize food considerably in Europe. So we need to get more clarity on sort of what the current European Commission wants us to get to in the future. So consumers are definitely not as involved as many growers are. But I think these protests, what they have also done is make people more aware of our food system and become more interested in it. Never have I read that many op-eds and editorials about foreign policy as in the last 2 years. I think ultimately that's a good thing.
It really is a good thing, I think. And are there organizations that are working on looking what the actual cost of food is if we were to remove subsidies?
I don't think the computer has been built yet to figure that out. It's really complicated because what you essentially would be asking for is one is the euros that you spend. And you can account for that. How much does it cost? But then, all the different variables that go into the price of food, which is that how much does it cost a farmer that 5 different pesticides were banned in the last 5 years and there were only 2 authorized, and biocontrol is being slowly authorized for some farmers, and organic pesticides, some of them were also phased out or not being sold anymore because some of the producers are not making it anymore. Some people are biocontrolling their vineyard with a falcon. It's all of these elements of cost and what is allowed and what isn't allowed, and then on top of that, Russia, Ukraine, and fertilizers and nitrogen exports from Russia that were very important for Europe now not coming through anymore. All of that plays a role. It's really hard to measure regulation up against subsidies. We would have to scale back both in order to get a better view on what the real price of food is.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. And so going into the pesticide conversation, so glyphosate is now allowed in the EU?
It still is, yeah.
It still is. Okay, so it was never fully banned.
It was never fully banned. There were countries that have tried, and usually the courts would overturn it.
Okay. And what impact has that had? What have your guys' producers been thinking about it?
So the thing is that producers ultimately are left to what the European Food Safety Authority allows in terms of new products and whether it's authorized in the EU, because it needs to be in order for them to use it. Even though there is unfortunately also illicit pesticide trade that happens where farmers buy from the black market what they're not supposed to, and that also does have health consequences because sometimes they might buy things that were banned for a good reason and they might use it wrong, and that's why it's good to have adherence to a regulatory system if that regulatory system operates with transparency and good faith. And I think that's what we've stopped doing because it becomes political. Glyphosate is a safe compound, but we still want to ban it because it's a political consideration by some political parties. I think that's the problem. Farmers would like to prepare for it, and what they're asking for is okay, if you want to ban glyphosate, tell us what else to use.
Right, and there really isn't a lot.
Well, so neonics were banned in the EU, and then they said, you can't use neonics anymore, you can have sulfoxaflor. And then sulfoxaflor got banned, right? And then we said, we don't really have an alternative right now, so let's see how it goes. And then sugar beet farmers, were almost going to go bankrupt in 2020 in France, so they said you can use neonics for 3 years, and then the court said, you can't actually use it. It's a whole back and forth. It's really frustrating. Every week you can have different news about what the courts say and what products ought to be used or not to be used. It's incredibly difficult to really stay on top of things, and I think a lot of farmers have become frustrated and would rather protest than have an office meeting with people who change their mind every other day.
To even just be able to keep up with what regulations are saying. And so let's go on to that trade piece. You were talking about mirroring, and
mirror clauses,
what does that look like, and what would your lessons for Canadian policymakers be on that?
So mirror clauses are essentially the EU approach to trade going forward. What it says is that if your regulation needs to mirror ours in order for you to trade properly with us. So if we ban neonics, you have to ban neonics if you want to sell to us. And you have to prove to us that what you export to us did not use neonics. So that essentially we're exporting our regulatory system abroad.
Right.
Essentially, in order to trade with Europe, you have to become Europe. And I don't think that's compatible with WTO rules and how trade should work. And what it takes is for the Canadian government to push back and say, like, hey, like, we're calling you out your BS here because this is not what the rules are. We already have an agreement. It's called CETA. It took many years, and still not all countries have ratified it in Europe. But if we want trade, we need to do it on the assumption that we're both equal partners, and that yes, we produce in our ways and you produce in your ways, and that's fine. And if we buy those products with the premises made that they're from that market, that should be okay. As a consumer, I get to choose.
Right. If
I
you can label it from certain countries.
It says made in Canada. If I think that Canada is completely wrong about the way it handles food, I don't have to buy it.
Right.
I have plenty of choices in Europe myself, but I want to have more choices in the supermarket. And I want the Canadian maple syrup, not the French one.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what would you say to farmers that are looking to do something? They aren't happy with trade, and the protests in Europe are working. What would you say to Canadian farmers? Because I feel like we're not quite at that point yet.
Yeah, and different countries have different protest cultures also, right? So I don't want to prescribe necessarily like what Canadian farmers ought to do and how they should protest, but you need to do something to create visibility. And yes, conferences are great, having media outlets is great, but there's only so far you can go with that. Once every decade you get a very charismatic person from that profession that is able to go on TV and really explain this well to an audience. But you might not necessarily have that here, so what you need to do is stunts. And some of the environmental organizations I was talking about in my talk that have been on the forefront of trying to ban GMOs and pesticides and think that all farmers are evil that are poisoning the consumers, they have been very good at this. They dress up as a piece of corn, and they do a little protest, a little spiel in front of Parliament. They get a lot of press. They get all the cameras on them. It's good to figure out sort of how do we catch the eyeball, how do we catch the attention of the audience, and then bring the narrative to where we want it to be. Politics is all about narrative building, and if nobody does it, the politicians do it by themselves, and that's never a good idea.
Not a good idea, no, for sure. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking your time out and chatting with me, and that was Bill Wirtz on Real Agriculture.
I'd love to hear from you on this topic. Do you agree with what you heard there from Bill Wirtz? How concerned should we be? And you know what? Has the tide turned somewhat in North America? Obviously, with the Trump administration in the U.S., there's a lot of pushback on some of these same European policies. I would even argue that in Canada, the current Liberal Party, who was maybe the champion of some of these policies, has even turned the ship a little bit. Look at the pullback in what's happened with the sustainable ag strategy. Now, that was not necessarily the government's choice. But we're seeing some in the Liberal leadership race. We're seeing some talks about the carbon tax. We had news yesterday about lambda psi and its use in crop rotations again, which is good news. So even in that Liberal government, if we have a conservative government here sometime in 2025, whenever we have an election, if you believe the polls, we're going to see even more of the ship turn for sure. Probably more in line. Even more so with what we've already seen foreshadowed in the United States example. So maybe North America is going to maybe miss this, avoid this somewhat. Time's going to tell, but obviously these things aren't forever. There will be new governments come in the future, and we're going to have to really continue to have long memories when it comes to some of these European examples that Bill Wirtz just lined out. So send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Would love your perspective. We'll read it. We'll get to them on the air here and read as many as we possibly can. Okay, we're going to take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
I'm the kind of guy who enjoys his freedom. Sure, I have a wife, kids, and a mortgage. But now I have new on-deck herbicide for wheat and barley. Thanks to a unique combination of actives, it delivers both superior control of tough weeds like kochia and proactive resistance management with, listen to this, complete rotational freedom. You can't tie this wild stallion down. Spray for today, plan for tomorrow with new on-deck herbicide. Visit your retailer or Corteva.ca to learn more.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Hey, SGS, delivering reliable agricultural lab testing for your crop, soil, feed, water, and seed. SGS is uniquely positioned, ready to elevate your business in Canada and the United States. You can call them now by calling 1-800-952-5407. That's 1-800-952-5407. We do not have a lot of time here for the top ag news stories of the day. I kind of mucked up how much time I spent talking here today, but yeah, whatever. You know, one of the things that I didn't get off my chest at the beginning, we were talking about the outcome of yesterday is, and it relates to the Michael Harvey conversation. What does Canada do in the next 30 days? Here's what I would do. I would not waste my time like Melanie Jolie did the end of last week in D.C. That's called busy work. That's called, we're living the life of the Instagram photo, taking a bunch of photos with Democrats. How is that moving the needle on what Canada needed to have happen before February 1st? It's not a good sign in terms of the open communication between Canada and the United States, or at least Canada and the White House. Canada needs to identify key people around the president that are willing and able to talk about the benefits of free trade from an economic standpoint. There is a massive push here for a restructuring of the U.S. trade relationship with a lot of different countries. Now, on China, this makes sense. Very much makes sense. I would argue, I really question some of the downfalls of enabling that strategy on bringing manufacturing from China back home to the United States and applying that to, say, agriculture from a North American perspective. So that is that. So you got to identify those people that have some influence. And as I heard on another podcast, that is not Mitch McConnell. That may be hurting. That may be hurting your cause. So the other thing that I would do is do what the Alberta government did last week. Alberta has been very vocal about the measures that it's taking on the border with Montana. Okay, so that border, say at the big crossing there at Sweetgrass Coots, for example, having Fox News come, do interviews, take video, showcase some of the things that Alberta and the federal government, for that matter, what they are doing to increase that the border security, whether it applies to illegal immigrants or fentanyl. That kind of messaging gets right to the president. It's well documented that he watches a lot of Newsmax, watches a lot of Fox News, OANN, those networks. That's how we reach him. It's also programs like this. Not to say the president listens to this show, but a lot of Americans do in farm country. And you know what? We thank you for that. I love your emails and your perspectives from all over the United States on this file. Whether you agree with me or you do not, I appreciate the perspective and the engagement. That's what makes this show so unique. We're talking to Canadian farmers and industry. We're talking to American farmers and industry. And honestly, I love it. It's a great opportunity, especially in some bumpy times like we're in today. Send me your feedback, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast brought to you by Authority Supreme Herbicide from FMC. Give your crops the 2-in-1 protection they deserve. Authority Supreme's dual modes of action attack weeds early, delivering effective resistant management and prolonged control during critical growth periods. Dominate the toughest weeds before they take hold. See your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com today.